Dune is a massive story. It's been described as an interstellar setting with medieval politics. The philosophies in Dune, especially those regarding politics, stretch really deep, which is understandable considering that Frank Herbert was a journalist for many years. Another interesting thing about Dune is the lack of computers or any sort of artificial intelligence, and instead, a focus on one's ability to expand their consciousness. For example, intense training from birth and consumption of a certain drug over a long period of time can breed what are known as mentats, human computers capable of performing near-instant calculations. But, of course, Dune revolves around one thing: the spice, a drug that, upon repeated consumption, can allow visions of the future. This prescient ability allows the Spacing Guild to travel at light speed without hitting any celestial body. By having navigators consume spice, they can foresee these things and avoid them. It's used for a variety of other purposes and also highly addictive. Because of the nature of the spice, as well as the themes of power and corruption displayed in Dune, power over this spice means power over the universe. The spice is the most valuable resource of all, and the temptation of holding power over it draws in different factions to try to seize control over it. So you probably know the story of Dune, at least the first book, but if not, simply put, it's about the conflicts of those who want power over the spice. It involved Paul, the main character, who is sort of a messianic figure created to gain control, though I don't want to get too much in detail. The first book and second movie end with Paul assuming power as Emperor of the Universe. So you've read the title, and maybe you're still confused why I said this. As I read the Dune books, I sort of had this feeling the whole time. This feeling isn't really fear, astonishment, though I felt a fair share of that. No, I just felt kind of odd. Not in a bad way, but I couldn't deny it. I also couldn't understand why, but now I think I do. Dune is cosmic horror. Reading the first Dune book, I felt this abstract feeling as well, but not in the same magnitude. It was likely because Dune was so new to me and it was all so interesting. Perhaps I was constantly distracted by all these made-up words being thrown around, many of which I couldn't easily infer. But the first Dune book didn't make me feel this eerie and odd feeling that I mentioned earlier. I first noticed this odd feeling when I was reading Dune Messiah. There's a part where Paul speaks to Stilgar, Stilgar being one of the Fremen leaders, the Fremen being the native people of Arrakis where the spice is found, and he asks Stilgar about the Golden Age of Earth, to which Stilgar is confused. Paul mentions different figures like Genghis Khan and Stilgar has no idea who they are. See, in Dune, there isn't just no reason behind why there are no computers. There was a war known as the Butlerian Jihad, where all thinking machines, which was their word for computer, were completely destroyed. In doing this, potentially thousands upon thousands of years of documented history were lost, which is never really brought up, but in this scene is very apparent. This also meant that for the most part, history was largely forgotten and not taught or passed down, at least from the earlier years of Earth. They have a few remnants of documentation, which is how Paul knows about these figures. Another instance that evoked this feeling was in God Emperor of Dune, which is the fourth installment of the series. They mention Earth once or twice if I remember correctly, but they make it seem incredibly insignificant. The Dune Wiki, which is somewhat often wrong, states that Earth is a wasteland and uninhabitable. Not only that, but they practically never mention Earth as any kind of significant force or vessel of any kind. This creates some kind of feeling that I eventually chose to call Temporal megalophobia. This feeling was accentuated especially from God Emperor of Dune, where, spoiler alert, Leto II rules over the universe for 3,000 years. What I meant by temporal megalophobia is that there's so much time passing, so many years, humanity still persisting, conflicting, advancing, and changing in all those years. A lot of those characters in the first Dune are lost to time in a way, not to even mention that Earth canonically exists in the universe, or at least did at one point, and now it's just nothing in the grander cosmos of Dune. And I believe this to be an element of cosmic horror that's rarely used due to impracticality. Very rare is it that a person or entity lives for over 3,000 years, or even close to that number. Sometimes characters can be that old, but if a character is introduced as being 1,000 years old, for example, it isn't as effective in the regard I talk about. Simply saying someone or something is X amount of years old doesn't mean much, or isn't as impactful, because we have less perspective of how much time that actually is. In Dune, we do. Many things change after thousands of years during Leto II's rule. So many people existed within those years, so many different experiences, so many conflicts from minuscule to enormous. When I came to this conclusion, first of all, I found temporal megalophobia to be a cool sounding phrase, but I felt this conclusion was missing something, and the answer was kind of right in front of me the whole time. It induced a sense of megalophobia. Not just of large objects or space though. A big example was how many people and planets there are in this universe. In that previous example from Dune Messiah where Paul talks about Genghis Khan and Hitler, he remarks how many people they killed. 6 million people to him, according to his reaction, was not very many. He even had to clarify by saying that was a lot of people to their standards. Then, Paul goes on to say he's killed over 60 billion people. Not only is 60 billion over 7 times the population of Earth today, which is massive, by the way, but this is how many people he's killed, not how many people there are. To put that into perspective real quick, let's just look at World War I. Now, World War I and the Holy War from Dune are fundamentally different. While World War I started from a wrong turn leading to an assassination and a chain reaction of war declarations, the Holy War was put into motion for 12 years not just for the Fremen to destroy the House Harkonnen, but to suppress all those who opposed the Lisan al-Gaib, the Muad'Dib, Paul Atreides. Anyway, World War I happened at a time when there was an estimated 2 billion people alive, and it killed a rather uncertain amount of people, but we can estimate between 33 and 42 million people in total. May they all rest in peace. This accounted for somewhere between 1.65% and 2.1% of the population at the time. That fact alone, apart from the atrocities of war, is oddly unsettling. 30 to 40 million people died over 100 years ago and accounted for 1 to 2% of the population. 1 to 2% of the population is still a large amount to lose. The fact that 30 to 40 million people didn't account for a larger percentage of the population is kind of crazy to me. If we assume that the Muad'Dib Jihad, otherwise known as the Holy War, was much more significant and brutal than World War I, we can assume that it caused death of a larger percentage of the population. If we assume that it accounted for, let's just say, 5% of the population of Dune, which is somewhat unlikely, this puts the population of the Dune universe at well over 1 trillion. One Redditor did their own calculations, probably a lot more accurate than my method, though he accounted for all planets, not just those affected by war. In the 60s, when Dune was written, the population was around 3 billion-ish. If just 10% of that population, on average, populated each planet in the Imperium, this means there are well over 3 trillion people in the universe of Dune. Not only that, but there's around 10,000 planets in the Imperium in Dune. This is kind of mind-blowing. I'm aware of our population today, but I never really attempted to comprehend how many people there truly are. There's an old saying that one of my teachers used to say, when you waste 1 second of class time by distracting the class, you're actually wasting 30 seconds, assuming there's 30 kids in the classroom. Applying this, if we take 1 second of collective perception of time as a population on Earth, each second, 248 years of time are experienced in total, from 8 billion different perspectives. It's impossible to fully comprehend, but it at least puts it into relative perspective. Now, how to make the population of Dune relatively comprehensible? Impossible, even in a small amount. Dune focuses on the political and religious philosophies that apply to humanity today and have for hundreds of years before. It doesn't focus on the common folk or civilian life of these planets, and instead focuses on political figures and their pursuit of power. We only really get insight on how these specific people think, the politicians, and not as much common folk. This is why I think the cosmic horror aspect is more secret in Dune, and maybe not as prominent as other things. Not in the sense that Frank Herbert secretly included it, but perhaps accidentally, or as a result, rather. When you begin thinking that there are trillions of individual stories in Dune, trillions of people, many of which have different beliefs, dreams, and goals, many of which will never get accomplished, many people suffering, it's almost headache-inducing. But after thinking, this fact is kind of astonishing. I'm not going to say Dune is the only book series that does this, or that Frank Herbert saying that Paul killed 60 billion people is particularly a great writing feat, but as someone who hasn't read a lot of science fiction like Dune, it did kind of blow me away. I guess I shouldn't say blow me away, instead, it kind of induced this feeling. The same feeling I talked about at the beginning of this video. The feeling I felt, call it megalophobia, or temporal megalophobia, was broadly put, this feeling of awe. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out my other content, and stay tuned, because I actually have 1 or 2 more Dune videos planned, but they may be far in the future. Thank you for watching this peak stasis video. I also wanted to say thank you guys for over 800 subscribers. It's taken over a year to get here, maybe, but that's okay, because this channel's kind of a passion project, a digital journal of sorts. but I'm glad I've been able to share my ideas with many people. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next Peak Stasis video.